Now that we're in cycle A of the gospel readings. So gospel A is Matthew, B is Mark, C is Luke. So we kind of travel through the lectionary over this 3-year period. One of Matthew's great concerns, as we've heard up to this point this year, and we'll hear the rest of the year, is telling the Jewish community that Jesus truly fulfills all the prophecies. Matthew's writing to a Jewish community, and so all the things from the Old Testament need to be brought into the New. Matthew quotes the Old Testament all the time, as we heard the last few weeks, even in his selection of disciples or going to preach in Capernaum and think, why Capernaum? And last week we heard about that fulfilled the prophecy. Land of Naphtali. So today, as we begin this Sermon on the Mount, Matthew's underlying point is that there had always been this prophecy in the Old Testament that another would come who was like Moses for the people. Someone who would bring them to freedom, and someone who would give them the law. So the Sermon on the Mount, it's not surprising that it's on a mount, because you might recall where Moses got the 10 Commandments was on Mount Sinai. So Matthew wants to make sure that you see that there's a parallel. Okay, Moses was on Mount Sinai. Jesus is on a mount, and he gives a new law for us, this Sermon on the Mount, which begins with these Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes are not a surprise either, because in the wisdom literature in the Old Testament is full of Beatitudes. Blessed are those, happy are those who, but they were all kind of real practical things. So the book of Proverbs is full of blessed are you if you do this. So it would not have been a surprise for the Jewish audience that Jesus starts out his sermon with these Beatitudes. However, they're not like the Old Testament Beatitudes. And they might have been sitting there going, did I hear him right? You know, like that famous line from, what was The Life of Brian, where Jesus is preaching there. You know, it's a comedy, and they're way in the back because they don't have a good sound system, saying, what did he say? I think he said, blessed are the cheesemakers. I think, oh yeah, the people from Wisconsin, they're the ones who get blessed. But these would have been surprising to them. What? I don't get it. Then they might have started thinking, this is not the right guy. Because blessed are the poor in spirit. What? Blessed are you when they insult you. What? Blessed are the meek. What? Hungering for justice. What? I don't get what he's saying. It's probably what most of them were saying to themselves. Hopefully they stayed for the rest of the sermon, but even the rest of the sermon becomes very tough. Praying for your enemies, doing good to those who hurt you. What? They probably wandered away going, I'm not sure if we're going to listen to that preacher again, because what he's saying is so radically different from what we heard in the Old Testament. And perhaps even for us to this day, we think, I still don't get it. Really? Those are the ones who are blessed? What does that mean? Blessed. Or happy. Some of the translations are happy. Here's one from Spanish that I always found interesting. Bienaventuranza, which that was always such a long word for blessed, but bienaventuranza, good adventure. A good adventure for those who are poor in spirit, meek, peacemakers. A good adventure. blessed. Perhaps it's a challenge to translate the Greek word into English, to understand just exactly what Jesus is saying happens to us when we're doing those kind of things, when we're mourning, when we're fighting for justice. What happens to us? Let me suggest another translation that comes from scholars who would say perhaps a better word for that Greek word is beloved, which would make sense in everything else Jesus does. What he's saying is, I see you, I love you, when these kind of things are going on in your life. When you're struggling a lot, when you are poor in spirit, when you can't seem to make it on your own, I notice you. I love you. When you're in the midst of grief, life is hard, God notices you. He loves you. When you're willing to be the meek one, the one who gives your life over to being shaped by Jesus, I notice you. I love you. When you're hungering and thirsting for justice, when you're working for peace in the world, I notice you. I see you. I love you. Because those are the people Jesus sees through the rest of his ministry. He sees those who are ill. He notices those who are grieving. He calls out those who really hunger for justice and righteousness. So perhaps that might be a better way of looking at this Beatitudes, is that it's a roadmap for Jesus' ministry. This is who he loves. This is who he comes for. And that way we realize he notices us. He sees us in the midst of our struggles, in the midst of our sufferings. And he says to us, even in the midst of that, you are loved. And then you and I, knowing that Jesus has that as his mission and that's how he loves us, then hopefully we in turn see those same people and notice them and love them. Because those are sometimes hard people to notice. Or we don't want to look at them. We just, oh my gosh, I avert my eyes because that person is suffering too much for me to look at. It's too overwhelming. I don't know what to do there. I can't deal with their grief. I can't deal with their pain. Or they're one of those peacemakers who drive me crazy when they want me to get involved as well. And no, I'm just not going to talk to them about that stuff. Or somebody who truly is being insulted and persecuted, think, wow, stay away from them because it might be catching. I don't want to get that. Do we notice them? Do we see them? And when we do, can we help them to know that they are loved? It's a roadmap for how Jesus ministered, the new Moses, and a roadmap for us as well.